is it possible to totally bring about a mutation in what is? And to go into that, to go into this question of bringing about a total revolution in what is, one must have an extraordinary sense of awareness. You know, to be aware what it means. To be aware of the trees, of the blue sky through the trees, of those hills beyond.
The speaker is Krishnamurti.
That noise of a motor.
He is a man who cannot be placed in a simple category like philosopher or religious leader. He is, however, one of the more challenging and creative men of our time. Born in South India in 1897 and educated in England, he has followed a singular and original path of thought free of factionalism and dogma. This is the first of 8 half-hour programs, and the first time that Krishnamurti has allowed his talks and private conversations to be filmed. The principal settings are the Oak Grove in Ojai, California, and the Thatcher School in the Ojai Valley. Ideas explored in this series range from what Krishnamurti calls the present crisis in consciousness to an examination of war, violence, love, pleasure and pain, the aging of the body, and death.
We were saying how very important it is to bring about in the human mind a radical revolution. The crisis, and there are always crises in the world, especially now, it seems to me, is a crisis in consciousness. A crisis that cannot anymore accept the old norms, the old patterns, the ancient traditions, a particular way of life, whether it is the American way or the European way or the Asiatic way. And considering what the world is now, with all the misery, conflict, destructive brutality, aggression, tremendous advancement in technology, and so on, it seems to me, though man has cultivated the external world and has more or less mastered it, inwardly he's still as he was. A great deal of animal in him is still brutal, violent, aggressive, acquisitive, competitive, and he has built a society along these lines. What do you think is happening to the whole American people as a whole? With the automation, with electronic brains, with, you know what I mean, the whole setup. What is happening and where are they going? You understand?
I think an increasing number of them are beginning to ask themselves the question to whether or not there may be alternative forms of human behavior. Because they have...
And what do they do? Because by then, after asking questions and all the rest of it, they're almost finished. They're ready for the grave. And in Europe, the phenomena there is the same as here, more or less. The production is more perhaps than in America even.
In Germany, West
Germany,
Germany.
and Russia is now doing the same. So take all these parts, put them together, China, Japan, whole of Asia, India included, and then Europe, America, China. Where is it all moving? What we are concerned with is the understanding of the whole process of life, with all its complexity, with its aggressions and miseries, with its sorrows and confusions and agonies. And to understand this vast field of life, which is a constant movement, one must not only hear the words, but also go beyond the words. Because the words, the explanations are not the facts. But most of us are caught in words. And one must be free of the word, the symbol, the idea, the conclusion. Then one can look. Then one can listen. And that act of listening is really a miracle. Perhaps it's the greatest miracle. When one can listen totally, without any defense, without any barrier, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, which doesn't mean the mind is open. On the contrary, the mind is extraordinarily alert then. I hope when one is listening to this talk or to the various other talks that are coming, one hears a lot of words. And hearing many words is not listening. It's like a noise among the leaves. Soon passes away. When we hear, we either accept or reject. Or we translate what we hear according to our knowledge, our background. Or we compare what is being said to what is already known. Or we oppose one idea by another. All these characteristics of hearing denies the act of listening. The act of listening is entirely different. When one listens, there is no comparison, there is no acceptance or rejection. The quality of listening is attention. And when you attend totally, with your whole mind, with your heart, with your nerves, with your eyes and ears completely, in that state of attention, there is the act of listening. And that act of listening puts away anything that is not true. When you give your whole attention to something, that is when you are completely listening. You listen to the totality of the thing. When you attend, there is no borders of inattention. When you so intensely intensely listen. You are listening to the birds, to the wind, to the breeze among the leaves. You listen to the slightest whisper that's about you. So in the same way, when one listens, that very act of listening brings about a total attention in which you see the totality and the whole significance and structure of what is being said. When you say, I can't, you have blocked yourself.
But you can understand more and more of it.
Not by blocking yourself. Look, sir, if I say there is no God, I've blocked myself, haven't I? Or if I say there is God, I've blocked myself. But if I say I really don't know, let's find out. Then I have the energy to go into it. Right? Now, so don't let us say yes or no. Don't let's take sides about it. Now, how would you see the totality of something, of life? You know, get a grasp of, feeling of it, a touch of it, a smell of it.
Well, as I said, by trying to take more and more of it and understand more and more of it.
You have no time.
I know, that's the problem. So
that's the problem, of course.
You're saying
that's what I said.
That way.
That's what I said at the beginning.
Yes.
I mean, if I take time, you know, it'd be impossible. Follow it up step by step. You have approached this problem with the habitual tools, and you have eliminated those tools. Not because you are prejudiced against them, but you say that they won't answer. Now, when you have eliminated them because they do not answer, your mind is sharper, isn't it?
If you're on the right track.
Of course, you have eliminated them. Right?
Yeah. Of what significance is hope and faith to living?
What significance is hope and faith to living? I hope you won't think me harsh if I say there is no significance at all. We've had hope. We've had faith. Faith in church, faith in politics, faith in leaders, faith in gurus. Because we've wanted to achieve a state of bliss, of happiness, and so on. And hope has nourished this faith. And when one observes through history, through our life, all that hope and faith have no meaning at all. Because what is important is what we are. Actually what we are. Not what we think we are. Or what we think we should be. But actually what is. If we know how to look at what is, that will bring about a tremendous transformation. Would you say there are California or America or even California, there's something new stirring? Or the same old pattern being repeated?
It seems to me to be the same old pattern.
Oh my God. Say in California, you live in California. Is the climate being so marvelous here? Is it productive of some new state of human being, new human? We are the product of the society in which we live, the experience, the knowledge, and all the rest of it. And there is nothing original. We repeat. And to find out anything new requires tremendous inquiry, meditation. You don't just get it by just coming to a meeting for an hour and thinking one has to work tremendously hard. You do work very hard to earn a livelihood, to go to the office every day. But this requires much more alertness, much more careful examination. And one doesn't have the energy, the patience, or the interest, because this is non-profitable. It doesn't bring you any profit, financial or any other way. Here is the question. I suffer physically, psychologically, and I can do something physically. Psychologically, I don't know what to do. And not knowing what to do, I escape. Or go to somebody who will tell me what to do. Or I put up with it, getting more and more and more bitter, dull, stupid, full of animosity and all the rest of it. Without doing any of those things, can one look at that thing? Neither enjoying it nor pushing it away. Which means, can I look at it without any demand to overcome it, to justify it, to control it, just to observe it?
How is it possible to do what you say in 2 seconds?
Beg pardon?
How is it possible to do what you say in 2 seconds?
How is it possible to do what I say for?
I said it would seem that I would have to start by doing it for a few seconds.
Do it for a second, do it. You know, as I said the other day, the word how is the most mischievous word. Because you want somebody else to tell you how to do it. So we suffer, not willing to suffer. There is suffering. And we're asking, can you look at it and remain with it, be quiet with it? Neither accepting nor rejecting, just be quiet with it. Huh? Please, doesn't this require great meditation? No, please, do it. If one does it, you will find that you derive from that very observation a great energy, don't you? You are not dissipating any energy. It is there.
When the question, such as what am I to do with myself, or however the question may be framed, there is always someone there, whether it's the advertising man on television or the Zen master, to give him a set of answers, and somebody follows these and nothing will happen. Because there is nothing in this culture that we're talking about that prompts people to listen, really to come into relation to themselves in a tough-minded way.
This is a young nation, you followed me?
It's a young nation.
a mixture of extraordinary, thoughts, feelings, and cultures. I should have thought they would produce something,
Well, we don't know quite what will happen when this nation faces up to the external crisis. They never have.
Would you say she has reached immature, like forced by circumstances, a pinnacle of maturity, and now declining?
This I would say. Yes.
You would say that. When you have really faced with a problem of war, of famine, of death, of poverty and so on, you can't argumentatively discuss about them. One has to deal with them. One has to put one's teeth into them. And you cannot artificially, intellectually have teeth to put into problems that are vital. So I hope when we ask questions and go into those questions, I hope they will not be merely intellectual or curious, but serious enough to investigate for ourselves what lies behind these questions and their import. What is the problem? Hunger. Hunger, lack of clothes, shelter, all that. Now, how is it going to be solved? Not by a particular nation. As you and I can't solve if we went India, we couldn't solve it. No, sovereign government is going to solve this. No Indian government is going to solve it. They can pretend, and they do. So, what is preventing the solution of this problem is nationalism. My flag, your flag, my country, your country, and the division that takes place geographically, which is exploited by the politician. That is the factor, one of the major factors of preventing the solution of starvation, of feeding the people. Now, science has means of giving food, clothes, and shelter practically to everybody. It's not being done because of you are a British, I'm an Indian or Russian. So it's a world problem, not individual or nationalistic problem.
Right. How do you suppose that one will be able to overcome these nationalistic barriers?
First, one has to be free of it oneself.
Yeah, well, I don't see how
Wait. One has to be free of it oneself. Neither American nor Indian nor... Then get up and talk, shout, do anything not for the little things, but for the major issues. Then perhaps you will sow some seed that will take root. Now, if every human being, educated, cultured, who is really serious, wants to solve this problem, he will do something. Like war. We have accepted war as the way of life. All man has, throughout centuries. And to stop war, difference is concerned with the whole process of living as a human being. Then perhaps we'll be able to solve this question of war.
Potentially
quite,
society has solved the problem of food, clothing, and shelter. So, once you've solved those problems, what else?
I don't quite understand what else. You mean what is beyond these three?
Yes.
So what is man seeking, basically? He basically is seeking these three. because these are absolute necessities, whether California, or India, or Russia, or anywhere. So beyond that, he says, after satisfying that, let's seek something else. Let's go after something else. Is that the way to begin? Is it bread first and then the other, or the other first and bread afterwards? I don't know if you...
I follow you, I believe.
Yes. So, in getting bread, we get lost. We get superficial, we get caught in the trap of amusement and religiosity, you know, all that. But if we were not seeking so much, if we were after something more than bread and butter, in the more included the bread and butter, then I think this problem would never arise. What we are trying, during all these discussions and talks here, is to see if we cannot radically bring about a transformation of the mind. Not accept things as they are, nor revolt against it. Revolt doesn't answer a thing. But to understand it, to go into it, to examine it, give your heart and your mind with everything that you have to find out, a way of living differently. But that depends on you and not somebody else. Because in this there is no teacher, no pupil. There is no leader. There is no guru. There is no master, no savior. You yourself are the teacher and the pupil, you are the master, you are the guru, you are the leader, you are everything. And to understand is to transform what is. I think that's been enough, won't it?
This has been Program 1 in a series of 8 programs presenting the original and challenging thought of Krishnamurti. During the past 4 decades, in his writings and talks in Europe, Asia, and America, Krishnamurti has continued to explore the real revolution, a radical change in ourselves. Subsequent programs will be concerned with love, death, fear, and the possibility of a fundamental change in consciousness. The next program in the series is titled Observing Ourselves.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.
Look at a flower. Have you ever looked at a flower? Or you have looked at it, given it a name, and passed it by. Or you have said, how beautiful, let me smell it. All these are destructive actions which prevent you from looking at that flower.
The speaker is Krishnamurti, one of the more challenging and creative men of our time. During the past 4 decades, the writings and talks of Krishnamurti have attracted an increasing audience in Europe, Asia, and America. This series represents the first time that Krishnamurti has allowed his talks to be filmed. In this second of 8 programs, filmed principally in the Ojai Valley in California, Krishnamurti, in public talks and in informal conversation, speaks directly to the fundamental problems of today. In particular, he speaks of the problem of change and suggests that the real problem is not changing society, but changing ourselves.
Football, go to various forms of entertainment, including churches, but it has no meaning. Is it possible to empty the mind of the known? One must have asked this question vaguely or with a purpose, because one suffers, one has anxieties, whether it's possible to go beyond, or one has vague hints of it. Now we are asking it, we are asking it as a question which must be answered, as a challenge which must be responded to. And this challenge is not an outward challenge, but a psychological inward challenge. And we're going to find out whether it is possible to empty the mind of the known. Look at that oak tree. Actually look at it. You are the observer, and the oak is the observed. There is a space between you and the thing, which is the tree. In that interval of space is time. Right? The time that has to be covered to see, that's the object. In that interval of space, there are all kinds of ideas which actually prevents me from seeing the fact of the tree. When you no longer name, no longer thought functioning as knowledge about that tree, then is there a space between you and the tree? Then, if you go into it very deeply and observe all this, then the observer is the observed, which is not the observer identifies himself with the tree. Observer is the image which has been created.
Observer is the image that has been created.
He is the censor, the entity that judges, compares, all that. Now, and then he looks at the object. Either the tree or his own experience, or his image, his relationship with somebody, another. So the observer is the image looking at the image which he has created about the other. So the relationship between the observer and the observed is not a relationship. It's two images looking at each other. Now, if the observer when the observer has no image at all, which is quite a tremendous problem, inquiry, which is meditation, all that, then the observer is the observed. What is the observer. Not the observer is looking at what is. When the observer is the observed, and the observer has always acted as though the observed is something different from himself, then he could act. But when he realizes that the observer is the observed, all action ceases on his part. And therefore all effort. And therefore there is no fear at all. This requires a great deal of inward inquiry inward observation, step by step without coming to any conclusion. Why do you choose? What is the necessity of choice? If you see something very clearly, as we just now saw what freedom implied, and when the mind is only free that it can see the total, when you see that clearly, there is no choice. It's only the confused mind that chooses. Awareness takes place only when there is no choice, or when you are aware of all the conflicting choices, conflicting desires, the strains, just to observe all this movement of contradiction. And knowing that the observer is the observed. And therefore, in that process there is no choice at all, but only watching what is. And that's entirely different from concentration. And that awareness brings a quality of attention. In which there is neither the observer nor the observed. When you really attend, completely attend. Like when you're now, if you are really listening, there is neither the listener nor the speaker. And that state of attention brings about an extraordinary freshness, youth, not youth, in America they use that word terribly. The extraordinary sense of freshness, quality of newness to the mind. And this emptying of the mind with all the experiences it has had is meditation. If you observe very closely, and that's one of the most arduous things, and that doesn't need effort at all, just to sit of an afternoon whenever you have time and leisure, to look at it. To look at a flower, to look at yourself, to look at all the movement of your thought and your feelings and your reactions. Just to observe without any choice, which is the beginning of self-knowing. And without self-knowing, man is caught everlastingly in confusion and misery.
The thing that so strikes me in the talks and the conversations that I've listened to is the contemporaneity, the immediacy, the directness.
Yes.
Of
our problems.
What we're talking about, and of our problems.
Yeah.
And I am at the same time so struck by the fact that most of the things of the world in which we live are designed in one sense simply to distract us from an understanding of the problem.
Yes, quite. So isn't it really, we have developed a whole network of escapes. And we are caught in those escapes. And those escapes are preventing us from understanding the problems. The problems are there. Whether, India, here, or Russia, anywhere, they're there. But I'm not at all sure if religions, organized religions, dogmas, sects, have not taken us away from the central fact of being able to face these problems. Not translate them, you follow what I mean? Not try to go beyond them, but actually face them and see if we can't dissolve them. And thought creates the past, the present, and the future, which is time. There is time by the clock, chronological time. We're not concerned with that. If you have to keep an appointment, and so on, you must have the chronological time of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But we're talking about the psychological time, which thought has bred. And that time is the product of thought. I have had that pleasure, I am going to have it, and I shall have it. This time quality is created by thought, bred, put together by thought. And thought is time, and it is time that creates fear. And without probing into this time, pleasure, thought, we are always bound by time. And therefore time has never a stop. It's only when there is an end to time that is something totally new.
You speak in terms of creating not a new consciousness, but a new society.
New society in relation to a mind that has completely undergone a revolution with regard to the psychological structure of society.
Yes. Which would mean a society which is not in time?
No, it has to, all society has to be in time. But the individuals who have freed themselves from this structure, psychological structure, will be freed of time. Therefore, they won't be slave to time, but yet obey the laws of time in society.
It certainly isn't modern man who has invented time, but
No,
the concept has an awful lot to do with time.
I think it is because he has made himself incapable of facing what is the fact. Therefore, he has a concept about the fact inwardly, psychologically, and according to that concept formula, he functions. Therefore, the fact, the formula, and action are contradictory with each other.
Yes.
And therefore, he is in constant battle with himself. So is it possible to act without idea? Idea being organized thought, and therefore formula.
Yes.
It's only the free mind can see the whole. Right?
But he must have some experience of the whole in order to see it.
No. To see the whole thing, you need a very sharp mind, very clear mind. A mind that's not biased. A mind that says, this I like, this I don't like.
Well, you have eliminated the mind that is in a pattern or expects to be led, or it won't ever see the complete truth. But does that necessarily mean that the mind that is free will see the truth?
Look, if you want to see the view of that valley from the hill, you take a survey of the whole thing, don't you? That means your mind is no longer merely fixed on the Thatcher school or a particular school. You look at the whole valley. So here is a whole complex map of life. Business, all the rest of that. Very complex. And to understand the whole of that, you must be free to look. Therefore we say, free the mind from fear. As long as there is fear, that fear will take shelter in a belief. Christian or doesn't matter what belief. Because fear demands comfort, security, hope, and all the rest of it. So, being afraid of something, death or something else, that fear must take shelter in something. Therefore, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, or some other belief, is the same. All beliefs are the same, because they are essentially born out of this fear. So really the question is, can fear be eliminated altogether? It's like inquiring into if there is such thing as God. I put it in quotes. That word God is so heavily loaded that has almost lost all its meaning. If one wants to discover it, if there is or if there is not, how does one proceed? Obviously, to find out, all types of belief must come to an end. And therefore, which means all form of fear must come to an end. Belief is a form of hope. And I have hope because I'm in despair. And I invent a belief, a security, a state of mind which says there is something which is permanent. And I believe in that. And that belief, obviously, not only conditions all examination, all perception, but it prevents the total inaction.
Sir, what is thinking?
You ask me what is thinking. So my mind begins. Let's go into a little bit. First, I can say, I really don't know. Then we can begin to analyze and say it is response of memory. You ask me, what is my name? And I know because I've repeated so often, I tell you immediately. Now, you ask me a little more complex question. It takes the time interval. In that time interval, the mind is in operation to find the answer. But if you ask me a question, something which I don't know, which nobody knows, which no book or philosophy answered it, then I can honestly say I don't know. I don't.
It's both in a significant question and a significant
answer. I really don't know. Now, when I say I don't know, I really mean I don't know. That means I'm not waiting for an answer or expecting someone to answer me or looking for an answer. I don't know. Which means my mind is completely alert, but I'm not looking because I don't know where to look or to whom to ask. Now, in that state, I begin to discover. Because that state is real freedom. Such a mind is the religious mind. No longer seeking, no longer demanding experiences, is not caught in visions. And such a mind has an activity totally different, at a different dimension, which thought can never possibly reach. Thought has a place, very small place, but when one realizes that, thought has no place at all. Which doesn't mean you live on ugly little sentiments, emotions. So one can function normally, healthily, sanely in this world, with a mind that is not cluttered up by thought. And it is only such a mind, the religious mind, that can know something beyond all the imaginations and structure of man's hope. There is no perfect society. And society doesn't want man to be free.
Society does not want man
to be free, because freedom means, according to socials, freedom means disorder. Revolt means disorder. Revolution means disorder. So society says, forbids that. But man is always seeking freedom. But freedom merely outwardly, in relation to the social structure. Therefore, he is a revolt against society, but not a revolt against the inner psychological structure which has created this society. I don't...
Yes. Therefore, the genuine radical is the revolution occurs within the human being.
Yeah. Within the skin rather than within the framework of social order. Because we are taking a journey together into the whole psychological structure of man. Because in the understanding of that structure and the meaning of it, we can then perhaps bring about a change in society. And society, God knows, needs a total change, a total revolution. All similarities should be distrusted.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Psychologically, man has built this extraordinary structure called society. Because inwardly he is that. But outwardly he is going to lay down laws how to control that. But inwardly we have...
Yes, I follow.
Inwardly we are just wild.
It seems to me that society and the individual's inner makeup, that a society and an individual's inner makeup can be governed by quite different laws. In fact, be two quite different things. And I know much less about the laws that may govern an individual inwardly than I do about the laws that govern society.
Quite naturally.
And yet at the same time, from what little I know about the laws that govern society, I find I have a profound pessimism with respect to creating a new society.
Quite. So that's why, sir, the problem is not changing society at all. And we always go off about talking about changing society, good society, great society and all that. I think the real problem is, can there be a real mutation in the human mind? That is the real question. When that takes place, society will look after itself.
It is as if that human society may have evolved, but the human being as such has not.
Has hardly evolved. And that, of course, awakens a problem, brings a problem. Is there evolution? Psychologically, not outwardly, there is. But psychologically, is there such thing as evolution? That is, becoming better, changing from this to that, or creating an inward perfection. All that implies time. And time is essentially, through time you can't possibly change the psychological factor. So if one can put away all idea of gradual revolutions inwardly, then we have to face the fact what is inwardly each minute and see if that fact, if what is cannot be absolutely be eliminated immediately. That is the real question. I don't know. There is no end to talking, to words, to attending meetings and reading. But attending meetings, reading, discussing has very little value. If attending meetings, discussions, and all the rest of it is merely a stimulus, then you are dependent. As people are dependent on LSD, on music, on pictures, on doing something. And as long as one is dependent, one is in conflict, one is in despair. And one has to come, not through reading, to discover the whole process of knowing oneself. For the knowing of oneself is the beginning and the end of all misery.
This has been the second of 8 programs presenting Krishnamurti, whose singularly challenging approach to the problems of our time places him outside of any simple category like philosopher or religious leader. Subsequent programs will explore love, fear, conflict, the aging of the body, and death. In his next talk, Krishnamurti will speak of freedom from fear.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.
What we are trying during all these discussions and talks here is to see if we cannot radically bring about a transformation of the mind. Not accept things as they are, nor revolt against it. Revolt doesn't answer a thing. But to understand it, to go into it, to examine it, give your heart and your mind with everything that you have to find out, a way of living differently.
The speaker is Krishnamurti, one of the more original and challenging men of our time. During the past 4 decades, his writings and talks in Europe, Asia, and America have followed a singular path, free from factionalism and dogma. This talk, Freedom from Fear, is the third in a series of 8 programs in which Krishnamurti speaks directly to those subjects which most profoundly affect the human condition: love and death, fear, and our discontent. He speaks of the real revolution, a radical change in ourselves.
Considering what the world is now, with all the misery, conflict, destructive brutality, aggression, tremendous advancement in technology, and so on, it seems to me, though man has cultivated the external world and has more or less mastered it, inwardly he's still as he was. A great deal of animal in him. is still brutal, violent, aggressive, acquisitive, competitive, and he has built a society along these lines. And the more one observes, and I think almost everyone, unless totally blind, deaf and dumb, is aware of the extraordinary contradictions of human beings, and to understand this extraordinary complex problem of existence, one must have tremendous passion, which cannot possibly be supplied by the intellect or by casual sentiment or emotionalism. Or the passion aroused by committing oneself to a particular course of action, or belonging to a particular political or religious group, that does give certain quality of intensity, a certain elan, a certain drive. But through it all, there is the demand for gratification, for pleasure. And the whole structure of society, with its morality, with its gods, with its culture, with its entertainment, is based on pleasure. So we hope that you will so listen to what is being said, not hear a lot of words, to a lot of ideas, because ideas and words are not the fact. Ideas and words never bring about a radical revolution, a mutation in the mind. So we're not dealing with ideas and opinions and judgment. What we are concerned is with bringing about a radical revolution in the mind. And that revolution must take place without effort, because all effort has behind it a motive. And a revolution with a motive is not a revolution at all. A change becomes merely a modified continuity when there is a motive. But a mutation, a radical transformation of the mind can only take place when there is no motive, and when we begin to understand the psychological structure of not only of society, which is part of us, and to understand it, there must be the act of listening. Not listening to the speaker, but listening to what is actually taking place in our souls. So it is a responsibility how you all listen, because we are taking a journey together into the whole psychological structure of man, because in the understanding of that structure and the meaning of it, we can then perhaps bring about a change in society. And society, God knows, needs a total change, a total revolution. So, as we were saying earlier, our whole concept, action, and urges are based on pleasure. And until one understands the nature and the structure of pleasure, there will always be fear. Fear not only in our relationships with each other, but fear of all life, the totality of existence. So without understanding pleasure, there can be no freedom from fear. And we are not denying pleasure. We are not advocating puritanical way of life, a suppression of pleasure or a substitution of pleasure, or the denial of that thing that we call great satisfaction. We are examining it. And in examination, there must be freedom from opinion. Otherwise you can't examine. Pleasure is an extraordinary thing to understand. It needs a great deal of attention, a swiftness of mind, a subtle perception. So one has to understand it. And to understand it, there must be neither withholding nor denying that quality, that principle of pleasure. And that's very difficult to do, because we are so heavily conditioned to accept and to function with the motive of pleasure, with gratification. Therefore, we are always limiting our total attention. We look at life in fragments. And as long as the particular totality, particular fragmentation exists, one cannot possibly see the total. If one says, I must have a certain pleasure, and I'm going to hold on to it at any price, then we will not comprehend or see the total pattern of pleasure. And we are concerned with seeing the totality of pleasure, what is involved in it. The pain, the frustration, the agony, the remorse, the ache of loneliness when all pleasure is denied. And naturally escape from all that through various forms, which again is the continuation of pleasure. And a mind that is caught, that is conditioned by this principle of pleasure, cannot obviously see what is true, cannot think clearly, and therefore it has no passion. It translates passion as sexual, or achieving some fragmentary activity and fulfillment in that fragment. So where there is no understanding of pleasure, there is only enthusiasm, sentimentality, which evokes brutality and callousness and all the rest of it. So what is pleasure? Because without understanding pleasure, there is no love. Love is not pleasure. Love is not desire. Love is not memory. And pleasure denies love. Therefore, it seems to me, it is important to understand this principle. Surely, pleasure is desire. Desire, which comes into being very naturally when you see something which gives you a stimulation, a sensation. And from that sensation there is desire. And the continuation of that desire is pleasure. And that pleasure is sustained by thought. I see something, and in that contact with it, there is a sensation. The sensation is the desire sustained by thought. Because thought is the response of memory. That memory is based on other experiences of pleasure and pain. And the thought gives to that desire the sustenance, the quality of pursuit and fulfillment. One can see this in oneself very simply. If one observes, it's all there in front of you. And the quality of observation cannot be taught by another. And if you are taught how to observe, you cease to observe. Then you have merely the technique of observation, which prevents you from actually seeing yourself. For yourself is the whole of mankind, with all the aches and the miseries, with the solitude and loneliness, despair, the utter loneliness of existence, meaninglessness of it all. And when you do so observe, it unfolds endlessly, which is life itself. Then you know you're not dependent on anybody, on any psychologist, on any theologian, or any priest, or any dogma. Then you are looking at this movement of life which is yourself. But unfortunately, we cannot look with clarity because we are driven by this principle of pleasure. So to understand pleasure, one has to understand the structure of thinking. Because it's thought that gives continuity to pleasure. I've had a an experience of pleasure yesterday, of different kinds, and thought thinks about that pleasure. And demands its continuity. So, memory of that pleasure of yesterday is reacting, demanding that it be renewed through thought. And thought is time, thinking about the past pleasure, past gratification, yesterday's delight and enjoyment. And that thought demands its continuity now. And thought projects the tomorrow's pleasure. And thought creates the past, the present, and the future, which is time. I have had that pleasure, I am going to have it, and I shall have it. This time quality is created by thought, bred, put together by thought. And thought is time, and it is time that creates fear. And without probing into this time, pleasure, thought, we are always bound by time. And therefore time has never a stop. It's only when there is an end to time that is something totally new. Otherwise it's merely a continuity of what has been modified through the present and conditioned by the future. For a human being to be free of fear, fear about the future, fear about the dozen fears that human beings have, conscious or undiscovered fears. Fears of the neighbor, fears of death, fear of being lonely, insecure, uncertain, fear of being confused, fear of being stupid and not trying to become very clever. Fear. Fear is always in relation to something. It doesn't exist by itself. And to be totally free of fear, not partially, not a fragment of that totality of what is considered fear, to be totally, that is, psychologically, to be completely be free of fear. One must understand thought, time, and pleasure. And this understanding is not intellectual or emotional. Understanding can only come when there is total attention. When you give your complete attention to pleasure, how it comes into being. What is time? Time which thought has created. I was, I will be, I am. I must change this into that. This idea of gradual process this idea of gradual psychological evolution of man. And that's very gratifying. Will gradually all of us become extraordinarily kindly. We shall gradually lose all our violence, aggression. We'll all be brotherly at one time, much later. This gradual concept, which is generally called evolution psychologically, seems to me so utterly false. We are not offering an opinion. This is a fact. Because when you give your attention to something completely, there is no time at all. You don't say, I will do it tomorrow. In that state of attention, there is neither yesterday, today, or tomorrow. Therefore, time has come to an end. But that ending of time cannot possibly be when there is the center as the principle of pleasure. Pleasure has in it pain. The two things cannot be separated. Pleasure is pain. If you have observed, so you cannot possibly psychologically avoid pain if you are pursuing psychologically pleasure. We want the one and we don't want the other. We function emotionally. Want and not want. And when deep issues, fundamental problems are concerned, and to give to your mind totally to it is rather difficult when all your life has been dissipated. Dissipated in fragmentary action. And when we do act totally, we only do it when there is a crisis. Then you wake up and give your whole attention. And this is a crisis. A talk of this kind is a crisis, is a challenge. You can't just push it aside. Therefore, it may be rather difficult, maybe perhaps arduous to follow all this. But it won't be arduous if you're following your own state of mind. You know, it's like sitting on the bank of a river and watching the river waters go by. And when you so watch, there is neither the observer nor the observed. There is only a movement. But that to observe, that there must be no fear, no time, no sense of pleasure and the demand for gratification. Then in that state you can observe the whole movement of life. The movement of life which is agony, despair, the ache of meaningless existence, the routine, the boredom, the great fears as of death, which we'll talk about another day. So you can watch all this. And when you so observe, the observer is that which is observing. And then you can go beyond all this. And the mutation can only take place in the mind when time, pleasure, and fear have come to an end, and therefore there is a certain dimension of quality which cannot be approached through thought.
This has been the third of 8 programs presenting Krishnamurti, whose original and challenging approach to the problems of our time places him outside any simple category such as philosopher or religious leader. Filmed in the Ojai Valley in California, the series represents the first time that Krishnamurti has permitted his talks to be filmed. The next program is called Meditation.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.
I should think one of our greatest problems in life must be surely knowing that our minds deteriorate, decline as one grows older, or deteriorate even when one is quite young, being a specialist along a certain line, and being unaware totally of the whole complex area of life. It must be a great problem to find out whether it is at all possible to stop this deterioration, so that the mind is always fresh, young, clear, decisive. And is it at all possible to end this decline? This evening, further, I would like to go into that. Because meditation is freeing the mind from the known.
The talks and writings of Krishnamurti cannot be limited to a single category such as philosophy or religion. Unquestionably, Krishnamurti is one of the more challenging and creative men of our time for his profound insights into the realities of the human condition. This series of 8 programs represents the first time that Krishnamurti has permitted his talks to be filmed. In this talk, the subject of which is meditation, Krishnamurti continues his exploration of the real revolution, a radical change in ourselves.
The question then arises, is it at all possible to end this decaying process of this brain, as well as of the mind, the whole total entity. And also it is possible to keep the physique, the body, extraordinarily alive, alert, energetic, and so on. So that seems to me a great issue, and therefore a challenge to find out. Now, the inquiry into this, not only verbally, but non-verbally, the inquiry, the examination into this is meditation. Because that word itself is so misused. There's so many methods of meditation. If we understand one, we shall understand the total systems and the ways of meditation. But the central issue that we are going to talk over together this evening is this, that whether the mind can ever rejuvenate itself, whether it can become fresh, young, unafraid. The fact is that there is deterioration. And if one looks at it and translates that deterioration or tries to transcend it or go beyond it in terms of personal inclination, temperament, and so on, it becomes a very shoddy affair. But if one observes it, as you would observe a tree at sunset, light on the water, the outlines of a blue hill, just to observe it, just to observe the process of what is actually taking place in each one of us. Then we will go together. And if you cannot do this, there will be gaps and we'll not be able to take the road together. Because we are concerned with the whole total process of living. And this total process of living, as one observes, is always creating an image about ourselves, about others. Image through experience. Image through conflict. And are we aware that there is an image in each one of us about ourselves? And that image begins to be more and more strong and more crystallized, and then there is the end of it all. So is one aware of it? And if one is aware of it, who is the entity that is aware of the image? You understand the issue? Is the image different from the image maker? Or the image making and the image are the same? Because unless one understands this factor very clearly, what we are going into will not be clear. You understand? I perceive I have an image about myself. I am this and that, I am a great man or a little man, or I am, my name is known, not known, God, you know, all the verbal structure about oneself and the non-verbal structure about oneself. Conscious or hidden. And I realize that image exists. If at all I become aware, watchful, I know there is this image is being formed all the time. And the observer who is aware of that image feels himself different from the image. Isn't that what's taking place? Right? I hope we are making this clear. And the observer then begins to either say to himself that this image is the factor that brings about a deterioration, therefore I must destroy the image in order to achieve a greater result, to make the mind young, fresh, and all the rest of it. And he struggles, he explains, he justifies, or adds, strives to alter it to a better image. And this is very important to understand. And effort, struggle in different ways, either physically or psychologically, as competition, as ambition, aggression, violence, pride, accumulated resentments, and so on, is one of the factors of deterioration. So when one realizes that the observer is the image maker, then our whole process of thinking undergoes a tremendous change. And so the image is the known. So as long as the brain, as long as the whole mind, in which is the mind, brain and the body, the whole mind functions within the field of the image, which is the known, of which one may be conscious or not, in that field is the factor of deterioration. Right? Please don't accept it as an idea which you will think about when you go home. You won't anyhow. But I mean, here we are doing it, taking the thing together. Therefore you must do it now, not when you go home and say, well, I've taken notes and I've understood it, I'll think about it. Don't take notes, because that doesn't help at all. So the question arises, is it possible to empty the mind of the known? You understand? Am I making myself clear? Doesn't matter. One must have asked this question vaguely or with a purpose because one suffers, one has anxieties, whether it's possible to go beyond, or one has vague hints of it. Now we are asking it, we are asking it as a question which must be answered, as a challenge which must be responded to. And this challenge is not an outward challenge, but a psychological inward challenge. And we're going to find out whether it is possible to empty the mind of the known. This emptying of the mind is meditation. And one must go into this question of meditation. Explain it a little bit. All the Asiatic people are conditioned by this word. So-called religious, serious people are conditioned by this word. Because through meditation they hope to find something which is not, which is something beyond mere daily existence. And to find it, they have various systems, very, very subtle or very crude, like the Zen. And also in that, so-called meditative systems is concentration, fixing the mind on one idea or one thought or one symbol and so on. And also there are various forms of stimulation, forcing oneself, stimulating oneself, and that is to expand consciousness more and more through will, through effort, through concentration, through determination to force. And by extending this consciousness, one hopes to arrive at a different state or a different dimension, or reach a point which the conscious mind cannot. Or one takes many, many drugs, including the latest, LSD and so on. That gives, for the moment, tremendous stimulation to the whole system. And in that state, one experiences extraordinary things. Extraordinary things through stimulation, through concentration, through discipline, through starvation, fasting. If one fasts for some days, one has obviously peculiar things happening. And one takes drugs, and that for the moment makes the body extraordinarily sensitive. You see colors which are most extraordinary, which you have never seen before. We see everything so clearly, there is no space between you and that thing which you see. And this goes on in various forms throughout the world. The repetition of words, like in the Catholic, or in those prayers, which all make the mind a little calm, quiet, obviously, which is a trick. If you keep on repeating, you get so dull. Obviously, you go to sleep and you think that's very quiet mind. But that's not meditation. So one can brush all that aside. Even though one is committed to it, we can throw all that out of the window. And as you are listening, I hope you'll throw it out. because we are going to something much deeper than these inventions. One can put all that aside. Because the more one practices a discipline, the more the mind becomes dull, mechanized. And that mechanizing routine process makes the mind somewhat quiet, but it is not the quietness of tremendous energy understanding. Then we can proceed to inquire whether it is at all possible to free the mind from the known. Not only the known of 1,000 years, but also of yesterday. The memory, which is memory. Which doesn't mean that I forget the way to the house that we live in, or technology. That obviously one must have. That's essential. Otherwise we can't live. But we are talking of things, something much at a deeper level. The deeper level where the image is always active. The image, which is the known, is functioning all the time. And whether that image and the maker of the image, which is the observer, whether it's possible to empty the mind of that. And emptying of that, of the known, is meditation. I can only understand you when I have no image about you. But if I have a friend, a relation, and so on, husband, wife, and all the rest of it, have an image. And the image I have, and you have about me, and I have about you, those images have relationship. And all our relationship is based on that. One sees very clearly that only when the image doesn't interfere, image as knowledge, thought, emotion, all the rest of it, interfere that I can look, I can hear, I can understand. It has happened to all of us. And suddenly you discuss, argue, point out, and so on. Suddenly your mind becomes quiet, and you see that, you say, by Jove, I've understood. That understanding is an action, not an idea. Right? So, there is understanding action, only action in a different sense than the action that we know, which is the action of the image of the known. We are talking of an understanding which is an action when the mind is completely quiet, in which understanding as action takes place, right? So, there is understanding and action only when the mind is completely quiet. And that quiet, still mind is not induced by any discipline, by any effort. And meditation then is, which one can do when you're sitting in the bus, walking the street, or washing dishes, I'd God knows what else. And meditation has nothing whatsoever to do with breathing and all that. If there's nothing mysterious about it, the mystery of life is beyond all this. Beyond the image, beyond effort, beyond the centralized, egotistic, subjective, self-centered activity. There is a vast field of something which can never be found through the known. And the emptying of the mind can only take place non-verbally only when there is no observer as the observed, all this demands tremendous attention, awareness. An awareness which is not concentration, just to observe without choosing. I mean, choice takes place only when there is confusion, not when there is clarity. So, awareness takes place only when there is no choice, or when you are aware of all the conflicting choices, conflicting desires, the strains, just to observe all this movement of contradiction. And knowing that the observer is the observed. And therefore, in that process there is no choice at all, but only watching what is. And that's entirely different from concentration. And that awareness brings a quality of attention. In which there is neither the observer nor the observed. And this emptying of the mind with all the experiences it has had is meditation. And that can be emptied only, all the experiences. When each experience, one becomes aware of it, sees the whole content of it, without choice, and therefore it goes, it passes by. Therefore there is no mark of that experience, as a wound, as something to remember, to recognize and keep. So meditation is a very strenuous process. It's not just a thing to do for old ladies or men who have nothing to do. This demands tremendous attention, right through. Then you'll find for yourself, no, there is no question of experience, there is no finding. Then when the mind is completely quiet, without any form of suggestion, hypnotism, or following a method, when the mind is completely quiet, then there is a quality and a different dimension of which thought can never possibly imagine or experience. Then it's beyond all search. There is no seeking. A mind that is full of light does not seek. It's only the dull, confused mind that's always seeking and hoping to find. What it finds is the result of its own confusion. Look, please, if you understand one question, you have understood all the questions. And so, what is important in all this, in asking questions and the answers or the explanations, is that the explanation has no value at all. What has value is how you ask the question and what you're expecting out of that question. If you are attentive of what you are asking, you will see that question is answered without any difficulty. Therefore, there is no teacher, you are everything yourself, both the teacher, the pupil, everything. That gives you tremendous freedom to inquire.
This has been the fourth of 8 programs presenting the talks of Krishnamurti. Subsequent programs in this series are titled What is Love?, Questioning, Living and Death, and The End of Conflict.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.
To ask questions is not to find an answer, but to discover.
During the past 4 decades, the talks and writings of Krishnamurti have stimulated and profoundly challenged audiences in Asia, Europe, and America. During a series of public talks given in the Ojai Valley in California, Krishnamurti, for the first time, permitted the presence of film cameras. This series of 8 programs is the result. As always, Krishnamurti addresses himself to questions which most directly affect our lives. The subject of this, the 5th program in the series, is What is Love?
Becomes naturally expectant, awaiting, and therefore not clear, decisive, and capable of discovery. And when one asks questions, one has to also to find out why one asks it. I feel one should ask questions about everything. But it matters very much why one is asking those questions. What is the background? What is the state of the mind that is asking those questions? Is it awaiting an answer or expecting to be told? If it is waiting for an answer, who is going to answer it? And a mind that's waiting to find the answer is not an active mind. It's just waiting, expecting. I think then, when we do put a question, it becomes very important. Then such questions have a catalytic effect. That such questions do produce an answer in themselves. So, let's proceed and find out what questions we're asking. We know what aggression is. We know what violence is, jealousy, and all the rest of it, which is again a form of energy, an expression of energy. And we must also find out, mustn't we, what love is. Now, how does one find out? Not if the energies are similar, but what love is. Is love pleasure, desire? Are you waiting for me to answer it? So how does one find out? Or is love an energy of in a different field altogether? Of a different quality, a different dimension. And how does one find out what love is? Not intellectually, not argumentatively, not splitting it up, saying divine, physical, and all the rest of it. How does one find out the nature of that thing? Will the conscious mind find it out? The conscious mind being the educated, sophisticated, the mind that has so many experiences, memories, stored up resentments, hatreds. Huh?
Love is a surplus when your own problems have been solved.
Love is a surplus when one's own problems are solved. We are trying to find that out, sir. Please, don't let us speculate what love is. That becomes childish. How does the mind come upon that thing without conscious effort? If I make a conscious effort to find it out, then my conscious effort must have a recognition of what it is. I must have already known it. I must already smelt it, tasted it, known the quality of it. And if I know it, it's merely a memory. And this memory which is of time, and has that memory and time anything to do with affection, love? So, how does one find it out, come upon it? You understand am I making myself clear? Question. It's like inquiring into if there is such thing as God. I put it in quotes. That word God is so heavily loaded that has almost lost all its meaning. If one wants to discover it, if there is or if there is not, how does one proceed? Obviously, to find out, all types of belief must come to an end. And that which means all form of fear must come to an end. Surely. No? Belief is a form of hope. And I have hope because I'm in despair. And I invent a belief, a security, a state of mind which says there is something which is permanent. And I believe in that. And that belief, obviously, not only conditions all examination, all perception, but it prevents the total inaction. I'll better wait. I must not only be free of every form of belief and therefore fear, and also my mind must be so sharp, so sensitive. This sensitivity brought about by right eating and, behavior and physical condition and all that. And then only there is a possibility of discovering something. So it seems to me in the same way to find out or come upon this thing called love, which is so heavily loaded, one must inquire into this question of pleasure and desire. We're not trying to suppress desire. The monks throughout the world have tried that. And those so-called religious people have attempted to control desire because some authority, a religious authority, has said, be free of desire. Because desire leads to bondage. So, so-called spiritual people, whatever that word may mean, those people have tried to either to suppress, eliminate, or sublimate it by identifying themselves with a greater desire. But it's still within the pattern, within the area of desire. And what's wrong with a desire? I see something nice, pleasant, striking. By the very looking of it, there is a sensation, there is desire out of that. Isn't that so? Please, this is not a talk, we must... And thought comes and gives that desires a continuity and vitality, and from that there is this seeking of pleasure. I think this is fairly simple, isn't it? The verbal explanation, but the explanation is not the fact, it's not what you discover. If you discovered it, it'll become tremendously vital. If I discover how thought strengthens desire by thinking about something which has pleased me, sensually or intellectually or a sunset or anything, by thinking about it, it has strengthened the nature of desire and has given it a continuity, and that continuity becomes pleasure. All our attitudes and values and demands are based on this search for comfort and pleasure. And is it possible for thought not to interfere? Now, I see something very beautiful. And there is immediate sensation and a desire to touch it, to hold it, to own it, to possess it. Then thought comes in And is it possible to look at something extraordinarily beautiful, man, woman, child, tree, a house, a picture, whatever it is, and merely observe without the interference of thought? And when thought interferes, there is a totally different kind of action as when thought doesn't interfere with desire. You understand? I wonder, right? You understand? When thought interferes with desire, which becomes pleasure, then activity has a different meaning altogether. Action. And when thought doesn't interfere with desire, there is again a totally different action which is not time-binding. So all this is, we are inquiring, aren't we, into the nature or come upon that thing which we call love. And we are asking if that love is something not of the same energy as hate. We must bear that in mind, otherwise we will wander away from the central question. And to answer that question, really, one has to, hasn't one, to free the mind from desire and pleasure, to find out. Gentlemen asks how. Is there a how? Is there a method? Listen to the questions. Is there a method to free the mind from pleasure? Huh? And the following of a method in order to achieve the result is again based on pleasure. No? So there is no how. There is only a state of listening. And when one listens so totally, this question is answered. You see, first of all, sir, how do you look at anything totally? You say it's not possible, and when you say it is not possible, you have already blocked yourself from finding out. So to find out, you have to look at your own mind, looking at your friend or somebody or at a tree, how you look at it. Why do we create an image of another and hold it? And is it not possible at the moment of experience to live it so completely or so let it go through you so that no image remains, no mark remains? Please, these are all questions that are really have to be answered not by words, but by actual direct perception and discovery. And to find out anything new requires tremendous inquiry, meditation. You don't just get it by just coming to a meeting for an hour and thinking one has to work tremendously hard. You do work very hard to earn a livelihood, to go to the office every day. But this requires much more alertness, much more careful examination. and one doesn't have the energy, the patience, or the interest, because this is non-profitable. It doesn't bring you any profit, financial or any other way.
Is the action of love the permanent escape of suffering?
Do we know what suffering is? Do you really know what suffering is? Only we know it when we remain with it, right? We don't remain with anything. Oh Lord, huh? Do we? We think about it. Let us take the question of suffering. Is it, first of all, is it possible to end it? Totally, without becoming hard, brutal, brittle, and all the rest of it. And to go to the very end of it and find out. Can we do that one thing this afternoon? Huh? Shall we? I suffer. Why do I suffer? And what is this nature of suffering? I suffer because I've lost my son, my mother, sister, or somebody doesn't love me, or I cannot fulfill, or I'm thwarted. I haven't got a good brain and somebody else has a good brain. And I know what it means to suffer. In suffering there is a great deal of self-pity. And suffering, I want to escape from it, because I don't know how to resolve it. And so I have a network of escapes. Now, can I stop from escaping? And it's very difficult because escaping is so subtle. I can escape by turning on the radio, magazine, talking to somebody, and so on, but the thing remains. And I don't want to get in touch with it. It's too painful, too agonizing. I push it away. So can I stop from escaping altogether and just look at it, live with it, know it? Not suppress it, not control it, not sublimate it, not do all that kind of idiotic stuff, but get to know it, live with it, go into it.
You say, be quiet. You do give an answer. And that, why just be quiet? Why not speak? Why not see? Why not hear? Why not do? Why not think?
So we went into that. We have thought a great deal about suffering. Volumes have been written by religious people and all the rest of it. And yet we suffer. Suffering apparently is a daily affair. And a man asks, is it possible to end it? And when it says, please tell me how to end it, then is that thinking? Is that examining? Or you're merely wanting a result which will be greatly pleasurable. When the suffering ends, obviously you think it'll be tremendous pleasure, there'll be great pleasure. So one follows the method in order to have that pleasure. But there is no understanding of suffering. And so, when there is no understanding of suffering, it comes in another form. So what we are trying to do is to find out for oneself whether it is possible to end this thing that we call suffering, in which is involved self-pity, loneliness, all that.
Suffer in order to understand suffering?
Is it necessary to suffer in order to understand? In order to understand? I think Christianity has made suffering into something holy. By suffering we say we're going to, reach heaven. I think a mind that suffers is the most stupid mind. It doesn't end it. So please, sir, I'll come back. What is it we are asking about? What is we're all wanting to find out? What is the mind when it is not quiet? All right. Most of our minds are not quiet, are they? Ceaselessly agitated, active, thinking about something, or soliloquizing, talking to itself, imagining. It is endlessly restless, isn't it? And how do we know any quiet when a mind is so restless? And it may be the nature of the mind never to be quiet. And why are we so restless? Especially modern world. My tendency, my demand for a particular satisfaction has not been satisfied. And I'm always seeking something which will give me immense satisfaction, and I know there isn't any. So the restless mind may be the result of a neurological state, or restless because we haven't found an answer to anything. An answer in the deep sense of the word to fundamental issues. Therefore, it's nothing to do. It's like a leaf driven all over the place. And without understanding the nature of one's own thinking, which is self-knowing, quietness of the mind is not possible. And to know oneself is the beginning of wisdom. Not in a book, not in psychology, all that. Wisdom is in knowing oneself. It comes out of the soil of self-knowing.
Why do you think the negative aspect of a restless mind right now the creative mind?
This has been the fifth of 8 programs presenting the talks of Krishnamurti. Subsequent programs in this series are titled Questioning, Living and Death, and The End of Conflict.
It's a very difficult word, creative.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.
So you think that we ought not to, we must find the solutions to the problems in ourselves?
Obviously, because you are the man who is going to suffer, you are the man who is going to... Exactly. You are the person who is going to have all the problems of life.
This series of talks by Krishnamurti represents the first time that he has permitted any of his talks or public appearances to be filmed. This program, titled Questioning, was filmed at the Thatcher School in the Ojai Valley in California.
As we saw him last week, I now present him to you, Mr. Krishnamurti.
All the things we talked about the other morning. You know, it is really quite difficult to ask questions. And one must ask questions right through life. The more we ask, the greater the understanding between our souls and our life. And also, we should, I think, in all asking questions and in replying and understanding of that question, one should have a spot of skepticism. One can ask questions intellectually, argumentatively, to sharpen one's own brains at the expense of somebody else. So, I hope you'll ask lots of questions. But to ask a question, it must be the right question. A wrong question will inevitably have no answer at all. But a right question, in the very asking of it, unfolds the understanding of it. And to ask a right question needs a great deal of intelligence, a great sensitivity, and a comprehension of the immense complexity of life. Anybody can ask a question. That's the easiest thing to do. But to ask the right question and to go to the very end of that question, not verbally or intellectually or merely emotionally, but as a whole, as a total problem and a total issue. So I hope we can ask questions and see how far we can get together on that.
There's probably great hunger in India, as you said in your talk a couple of days ago. And I think I want to do something about it. And so I go to India, and I try to help the people, and I try to help them overcome their hunger and things of this nature. But is it really doing that much good?
You're going or my going to India and helping a little bit here and there doesn't get anywhere. You might give food for half a dozen people. Do your best, but that's, you can't. There are 470 million people, and doing a little bit there. It doesn't. I mean, I'm not laughing at it. I mean, it doesn't get anywhere. Now, what will solve the problem? What is the problem? Hunger. Hunger, lack of clothes, shelter, all that. Now, how is it going to be solved? Not by a particular nation. As you and I can't solve if we went to India, we couldn't solve it. No sovereign government is going to solve this. No Indian government is going to solve it. They can pretend, and they do. So, what is preventing the solution of this problem is nationalism. My flag, my country, your country, and the division that takes place geographically, which is exploited by the politician. That is the factor, one of the major factors of preventing the solution of starvation, of feeding the people. Now, science has means of giving food, clothes, and shelter practically to everybody. It's not being done because of you are a British, I'm an Indian or Russian. We have our ideology and you have your ideology. Your king and my king, your army and my army, all that's preventing us. So it's a world problem, not individual or nationalistic problem.
Right. How do you suppose that we'll be able to overcome these nationalistic barriers?
First, one has to be free of it oneself. Wait. One has to be free of it oneself. Neither American nor Indian nor... right. Then get up and talk, shout, do anything not for the little things, but for the major issues. Then perhaps you will sow some seed that will take root. That's all. Now, if every human being, educated, cultured, who is really serious, wants to solve this problem, he will do something. Like war. We have accepted war as the way of life. All man has, throughout centuries. And to stop war, difference is concerned with the whole process of living as a human being. Then perhaps we'll be able to solve this question of war.
You spoke last week of man achieving a clarity of mind and a broader view of life. But it would seem to me that one could achieve this clarity of mind and a greater, deeper understanding of life if you were to try to attack a certain part of it and then see the result and therefore understand what happened more deeply and
so that's
increase his understanding.
I understand. You mean there are these fragments, business, religious, political, science, and so on, fragments. Now, and you, by going through each fragment, you would understand the whole thing. Participation of it in each fragment. Now, do you know what that implies? How long it would take for each person, for every individual to take each fragment and go through it, understand it?
To me, it seemed to be impossible.
Impossible, isn't it? Completely impossible. And therefore, they say, let us put all these fragments together. Which again is impossible. You can't, by through fragment, make the whole. So, how do you then understand something totally? First of all, let's be clear, a fragment can never make the whole, right? And putting the fragments together is not the whole. And also that it is not necessary to go through all these, right? Through all the fragments. It's like saying you must get drunk to understand what sobriety is. And then that life is too short. You can't go through all of it. So if that is clear, then how does one see the whole of something. Whole of life, life including sorrow, death, love, family, politics, economics, amusement, entertainment, the misery, this, all that. Now, how do you see the whole thing? You go into it, so how do you see it? How would you, if that was a question, a serious question you have to tackle?
Well, David, you couldn't.
Wait. Moment you say you cannot or can, you are finished. You stop investigating. When you say I can't, you have blocked yourself.
But you can understand more and more of it.
Not by blocking yourself. Look, sir, if I say there is no God, I've blocked myself, haven't I? Or if I say there is God, I've blocked myself. But if I say I really don't know, let's find out. Then I have the energy to go into it. Right? Now, so don't let's say yes or no. Don't let's take sides about it. Now, how would you see the totality of something, of life? Get a grasp of, feeling of it, a touch of it, a smell of it.
Well, as I said, by trying to take more and more of it and understand more and more of it.
You have no time.
I know, that's the problem.
That's the problem, of course.
You're saying
that's what I said.
That way.
That's what I said at the beginning.
Yes.
I mean, if I take time, it'd be impossible. So now, eliminate time. You follow what we are doing? We are eliminating time, gradually, get it? We are also eliminating fragmentary approaches, right? And also we are eliminating the idea that when put them all together, we'll get an understanding. You have approached this problem with the habitual tools, and you have eliminated those tools. Not because you are prejudiced against them, but you say that they won't answer. Now, when you have eliminated them because they do not answer, your mind is sharper, isn't it?
If you're on the right track.
Of course, you have eliminated them. Right?
Right.
Your mind is very sharp because it is no longer following the traditional approach. Right?
But he must have some experience of the whole in order to see it.
No. To see the whole thing, you need a very sharp mind, very clear mind. A mind that's not biased. A mind that says, this I like, this I don't like.
The mind that is in a pattern or expects to be led, it won't ever see the complete truth. But does that necessarily mean that the mind that is free will see the truth?
If you want to see the view of that valley from the hill, you take a survey of the whole thing, don't you? That means your mind is no longer merely fixed on the Thatcher school or a particular school. You look at the whole valley. So here is a whole complex map of life. Business, all the rest of it. Very complex. And to understand the whole of that, you must be free to look. But you cannot look if you say, well, it must be, you can only look at it through a fragmentary approach. Therefore, we say, free the mind from fear. As long as there is fear, that fear will take shelter in a belief. Christian or doesn't matter what belief. Because fear demands comfort, security, hope, and all the rest of it. So, being afraid of something, death or something else, that fear must take shelter in something. Therefore, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, or some other belief, is the same. All beliefs are the same, because they are essentially born out of this fear. So really the question is, can fear be eliminated altogether? And that's why the religions and the ancient cultures have said, believe not knowing. Yes, sir.
Well, then to eliminate fear of death, say, from the mind, one must know what death is.
How must you? How can you know? Wait, sir. How can you know what death is when the mind is afraid of death? When I'm afraid of you.
Right, but you can't get rid of your fear unless you know what it
Wait,
is.
sir, wait. I'm afraid of you. And therefore, I always take shelter. I never look at you. Right? I barricade myself, I invent a lot of ideas, prevent myself from looking at you, right? I can only look at you when I have no fear. And what am I afraid of? Not of death, but of something I have known. My family, my job, my daily routine, the things I have. And I'm afraid of losing them.
I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
It's really quite a complex problem. You can't just my fault or your fault. I think opinion has very little place when we are faced with direct things of life. Most of us are guided by our personal inclination or personal idiosyncrasy, or compelled by circumstances, which are all very small affairs. But a problem like death is a problem of man. Whether he lives in China, India, or in Russia, or here, it's a problem which man has struggled with through centuries upon centuries. And the Egyptians, say, for instance, lived. For them, death was much more important than living. And there are whole communities right through the world, historically, and also when one has lived in a country like India, where culture is very, very ancient. There are all kinds of ideas, beliefs, dogmas about death. Death being, one is frightened of it. Frightened of that thing called death, which is going to put an end to everything. So they invent theories, like reincarnation. You know something about it? Either you choose that or the Christian belief, which depends upon your conditioning. If you are a Christian, naturally brought up in a Christian world, you will accept that, the Christian dogma. Now, if one can put aside the Asiatic belief and the Christian belief and every form of personal hope and despair, and then we can investigate the meaning of death. You see, as long as there is fear, the unknown, death, becomes a tragic affair. I don't know if, So, is it possible, first, to eliminate psychological fear altogether? That's quite a, I won't go into all that. Unless that is done systematically, with clarity, without any arrière-pensée, without any holding back from this problem of fear, then one can go into this question of death very, very deeply. But otherwise you're caught in a rationalization, or in the whole of the Asian belief of reincarnation, or a Christian belief, or you don't care. But it seems to me a society or a community or a group of people who are not concerned with death, don't understand, have no foothold in life. You know what I mean? Have nothing. Therefore they become terribly superficial. That's what's happening in this country. Terribly mundane, physical, and no culture can stand that.
Do you agree that the fear of death is the fear of losing your possessions, the joys of life?
Partly.
Well, if that's so, then the person who has reached the state of clarity, who has cast off all his fears and the fear of death, therefore he wouldn't, the joys of life wouldn't mean anything to him.
Oh.
Is that?
Now, that's just it. Why not? How do you lose the fear of death?
By not fearing the things that you...
No. There must be much more positive action than that. You must die every day. Die every day to the things that you call pleasure and pain, to the things which you have cherished, die. Otherwise, what? Look at, sir, what are you? A bundle of memories, aren't you? Huh? Experience, knowledge, information. And that you carry on all the day long, all the years. And that bundle of memories keeps the mind very dull, stupid, not fresh. But if you say, well, I'll put away all my bundles, each day, your mind is extraordinarily alert. Yes, sir.
So if you were to do this, like die every day and to get rid of all your fears, to reach this clarity of mind and to have an extremely sharp mind, would not you then be completely isolated from anything, from the world, from life?
All right. Why should you not be isolated? What is the world?
Well, that's fine. I think it can be very good. But then, if you are going to do anything with this clarity of mind, such as change the world order,
then you will change it. Then you will talk, right? Push. But you won't belong to the messy world.
In order to change it, you do have to approach a part of it. For instance,
approach, again, take the whole of it, not just parts of it. Tackle the whole issue, not just one part, partial issue. So look.
So far no one has been able to do this.
Oh, then let's do it.
And you said that we have to approach everything with an open mind and we mustn't take any point of view. That if we get confused, we'll judge. Well, when you approach, say, what is life with an open mind, you'll start and then you'll get one fragment you won't understand. And you'll question it. And then you'll become confused. And then you'll have to judge. Well, how are we supposed to do this without...
First of all, there are contradictory informations. One propagandist says one thing, another propagandist says another. the priest says something, and the businessman, the militaryman, and the politician, everybody is contradicting the other, and you and people generally are the recipient of all that contradiction. Right? So what do you do?
Well, you have to judge.
And no, you realize you are the result of all these contradictions. How can you judge when I'm... No, I suggest, first of all, is it possible not to be influenced at all? No, don't say no. You see, the moment you say no, you've already taken a stand. Is it possible not to be influenced? Yes. And that's very difficult because we are the result of 1,000 influences. Food, climate, and the culture in which you are born, and so on and so on. And we are the result of this terrific pressure and strains and influences. And I am that, you are that. And so how do you free yourself first from the influence, from your conditioning, and then you can ask the question, how am I to keep clear all the time of confusion? Then it's very simple, you're not confused.
If we think that Jesus is the Son of God, it limits us. If we think that he was some man who taught wisely and tried to teach people, it helps us to understand him better. Do you think so?
I should think so.
No.
No, to me, you see, sir, that's not very great importance. What is great importance is not what somebody said or somebody did or did not. Can I, as a human being, lead a different kind of life? That's all. That is the crucial point. Not what Buddha, all the people have said, well, may be true, may not be true. What is important, what is essential and urgent is, can I live a different life altogether?
This has been the 6th of 8 programs presenting Krishnamurti, whose extraordinary approach to the fundamental questions of our time has attracted wide attention in Europe, Asia, and America. This program was filmed at the Thatcher School in California. The concluding 2 programs in this series are called Living and Death and The End of Conflict.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.
The desire to achieve is essentially based on comfort, pleasure, satisfaction, gratification. And what we are going to deal with this morning does not need any kind of effort at all. Because effort exists only when there's contradiction. Contradiction within.
The speaker is Krishnamurti, whose unorthodox and challenging approach to fundamental philosophical and religious questions has made him one of the more stimulating and authentic voices of our time. This is the 7th of 8 programs filmed with Krishnamurti in the Ojai Valley in California, and it represents the first time that Krishnamurti has allowed his talks to be filmed.
And it is these contradictory desires that bring about conflict. The wanting and not wanting. What is and what should be. The what is trying to conform to a pattern of what should be. And so there is always conflict. And apparently that's part of our daily existence. From getting up in the morning, going to the office, struggling, till we go back to bed, and from the moment we are born till we die, there is this constant effort and battle. And to make effort, to get rid of effort, is still further effort. The things that we're going to discuss this morning, as I said, needs no effort at all. What it needs is a total perception of the whole process of life. And to perceive this whole phenomena of life, one needs energy. And that energy is denied when there is this drive, this effort to achieve something. You know, it's only when the cup is empty that it can be filled. It's only when the mind and heart are totally empty then it can comprehend, and it can live. But to be so completely empty is not a negative phenomenon. On the contrary, it is the highest form of intelligence. It's the highest form of love, to be so completely empty, so that there is not a scratch of memory, not a word, not a conclusion that distorts perception. And what we are going to discuss or talk over together this morning demands a quality of mind that has no fear of any kind. So one has first to understand fear. Because what we are going to discuss is this problem of death. And to understand this enormous problem which has faced man from the beginning of time, one has to be free of fear. There are so many forms of fear. Fear of darkness, fear of what somebody says, fear of being hurt, fear of insecurity, fear of loneliness, and the ultimate fear, which is death. Fear, in every form, is thought in action with regard to the past, through the present and to the future. I am afraid of what will happen. And I'm afraid of something I have done in the past which I want to cover up. So, thought, fear is the movement of time. And it's very important, if we will be free of fear, to understand this movement of time, which is essentially the process of thinking. The now, the actual living present, the now, is the result of yesterday and 1,000 yesterdays. So there is no actual now. And fear is this movement of time which is the product of thought. When I am confronted with something dangerous, immediately there is no fear. I act, either foolishly, ignorantly, but there is action. But give time, an interval, then thought comes into operation. Then I'm afraid. I'm sure each one of us has various kinds of fears. Take one of them, bring it out in the open, and look at it. And how you look at it matters immensely. First, do you look at it as though it was something outside of you, as something which is not you, but something which is placed outside? So, there is the observer, and fear is something outside of you. Right? So there is this duality, this contradiction. I am not afraid, but there is fear, which I must overcome. I must do something about that thing which I call fear. So the observer is different from the thing observed. And is there a difference? There is no difference if you examine. The observer is the observed. That is, the observer is the center of accumulated memory, experience, knowledge, information, and so on. The sensor, the observer. He or it is aware outside of himself something which he calls fear. And he is making constant effort to run away or translate or transcend or suppress that fear. The more the tension between the observer and the fact of fear, the greater the effort, the greater the desire to escape, to run away, to cover up. And if you cannot run away, one becomes neurotic. Because the tension becomes so intense. And to live in that intense darkness of fear is a state of neurosis. But as we said, when the observer is the observed, not an idea but the fact, then there is no effort at all. Because then there is no contradiction. I am fear. And what can I do? Please follow this. When the observer is the observed, and the observer has always acted as though the observed is something different from himself, then he could act. But when he realizes that the observer is the observed, all action ceases on his part. And therefore all effort. And therefore there is no fear at all. This requires a great deal of inward inquiry, inward observation, step by step without coming to any conclusion. And when there is no fear, because the observer is the thing which he has externalized as fear, of which he is himself, then this action which was positive, that is doing something about fear, then the observer is the observed in that state that's complete in action. And that complete inaction is the highest form of action. Now, so there is no effort at all. It's only the dull mind, the mind that's committed, the mind that is achieving, not achieving, that is in constant battle, struggle, effort. And this effort, this struggle is considered the positive way of life. It is the most mischievous way of life. Let's proceed to examine this question of what is death. There are three things one has to understand: living, love, and death. They all go together. You cannot separate death from love and living. To us, living, as it is a torture, a misery, meaningless existence. The more clever, the more sensitive, the more intellectually, emotionally one is alive, it has no meaning at all. And seeing that it has no meaning, we invent a meaning. We project a meaning. And according to that meaning, try to live. And which is not living at all. So one has to understand what is living. And living is not this battle between human beings. It's not this battle of competition, of races, of ambition. Oh, and all the rest of it. I don't have to go into all the details of it. We all know what life is, the torture, the sorrow, the endless misery and confusion. And that's what we call living. And love, as we know, is hedged about with jealousy, with suspicion, aggression, violence. And so we don't know what that is either. And obviously we don't know what death is, because we are frightened of it. There is much deeper fact, deeper issue involved in death. That is, the psychological ending, the me, the accumulated experience as a human being, with all the knowledge, with all the accumulated information, every form of memory, treasured, cherished, and despised, put away, all that is the center, which is the me, the ego, the person. And it is that center, the psychological center, that one is afraid of losing. And that center is the result of time. And that center creates the space round itself, like all centers do. This microphone exists in space, and it creates a space round itself, which is fairly simple. And there is the center of me as the me, which has created a space round itself. And death to most of us is the losing of that center. Isn't it? The things that I have known, my family, my friends, all the things that I have accumulated, which is the known. The center is the known. And death is something of which I don't know at all. And what I'm frightened is losing the known, not of the unknown. And losing the known means I'm completely lonely. I'm completely alone in a void. And that's what I'm afraid of. Now, is it possible to end that center each day, not having accumulated, then giving it up, but to die to that center every day, every minute? That is, that center is the accumulation of experience, knowledge. And life is a process of experience, a challenge and a response. You have an experience, a pleasant or unpleasant experience, dangerous or pleasurable. And to receive that experience and understand it and die to it immediately, so that there is no memory of as a center which retains that experience. We often do this naturally. but to be aware so intensely, without any choice, and to be aware so every experience is totally assimilated, understood, and dissolved. That requires a great deal of energy, which means attention. That is, to die every day to every pleasure, to every thought, every form of accumulation. So that with the dying, the mind is made fresh and the heart renews itself, so that life doesn't become a torture. So, in dying every day to everything that we know, is to love. Otherwise one cannot love. Love is not something to be cultivated. Like humility, the moment you cultivate humility, it's a cloak of vanity. And it's only when you die to everything or every experience that you have had that you're living. So living is a movement, fresh, new, innocent, every minute of the day, fresh. And to die to the past is to live totally at an altogether a different dimension.
If I attend to a tree in the way that you describe, so that the observer is the observed, the tree is still there.
Of course, sir.
If I attend to my fear in the same way, won't my fear also still be there?
No, you see, first of all, I don't want to get rid of my fear. I want to understand it. To understand something, I must care for it. I must love it. I must be careful with it. And if I say I must get rid of it, I've already acted most foolishly. Because I have to understand the structure and the nature of fear. And to understand it, I must look at it. And I cannot look at it if I say if I want to get rid of it, or suppress it, or sublimate it. I must actually look at it, come into contact with it, not through a word, but with the fact, with what it actually is. How can the mind, which is so crowded, so everlastingly chattering, how can that mind be empty? I'm afraid there is no way. Any method is the most impractical way. That's why, sir, we said at the beginning, what is important is to listen. And to listen needs attention, care, a certain quality of affection in which there is communion. And then you'll find without an effort it is coming to be. So you see, sir, we are so used to being told what to do. We worship authority. And we have lost all capacities in the world, all intention to find things for ourselves. And in this, what we are talking about, there is no teacher, there is no method, there is no practice. There is only perception of what is, and when there is that perception, then the problem is resolved. Yeah.
Of what significance is hope and faith to living?
What significance is hope and faith to living? I hope you won't think me harsh if I say there is no significance at all. We've had hope, we've had faith, faith in church, faith in politics, faith in leaders, faith in gurus, because we've wanted to achieve a state of bliss, of happiness, and so on. And hope has nourished this faith. And when one observes through history, through our life, all that hope and faith have no meaning at all, because what is important is what we are, actually what we are, not what we think we are, or what we think we should be, but actually what is. If we know how to look at what is, that will bring about a tremendous transformation.
The talks and writings of Krishnamurti place him outside of any ordinary category, such as philosopher or religious leader. This has been the 7th in a series of 8 programs. The concluding program in the series is called The End of Conflict.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.
And most of us, I presume, have come here this morning or go to church or anything because our life is so monotonous, so lonely, so utterly meaningless. And we want to find something that will be deeply gratifying, that will bring about deep content. So, why are we discontented, and with what? Please answer the question to yourselves. The speaker will go into it, but you have to answer it for yourself.
The talks and the writings of Krishnamurti have, over the past 4 decades, given him a unique position as one of the more challenging and authentic voices of our time. The series, of which this is the concluding program, represents the first time that Krishnamurti has allowed his talks to be filmed.
Joy has continued, joy has not. We are discontented through comparison. We are discontented to bring about a change in what is. And we are discontented because we don't know what to do with what is. And being discontented with what is, we develop the idea of what should be, the ideal, the utopia, the gods, the heaven, and so on and on and on. So our action then is based on an idea, and the approximation to that idea is action. Then I am discontented with what is, and I want to be something different from what is, the idea being rational or irrational thought put together as an idea or an ideal, and I have that ideal, and that according to that ideal I live, which is called action. And there is conflict between what is and what should be. And in that conflict we are caught. And all our questions, demands, searching is that, between what is and what should be. And the greater the tension between what is and what should be, the greater the neurosis. And also greater if one has the capacity to express that conflict verbally. In the theater, in music, in art, in so many ways, literature and so on. And being discontent with what is, we invent gods, which becomes our religion. That is the escape we have from what is. And is it possible to radically change what is? That is the real search, not the other. The other is not such at all. Is it possible to totally bring about a mutation in what is? And to go into that, to go into this question of bringing about a total revolution in what is, one must have an extraordinary sense of awareness. You know, to be aware what it means. To be aware of the trees, of the blue sky through the trees, of those hills beyond, of that noise of a motor, of the colors that are there in front. Just to be aware. And to be aware so choicelessly, you know very well that you can't change it. You can't change the mountains. You can't change the beauty of that sky. When we are aware of what is, we want to transform it. We are endlessly active about it. And there begins sorrow. Because with the ending of sorrow is the beginning of wisdom. And the ending of sorrow is the understanding of what is. And the understanding of what is can only come when you observe, when you are aware, when the mind is incapable of wanting to change what is, which doesn't mean it is satisfied with what is. So, one has freed the mind, or the mind has freed itself from this everlasting search. That's finished. And that means a tremendous burden off of one's shoulder. Being free, you can look. And to look, you need great energy. And that energy comes only when there is this awareness without conflict. This awareness in which there is no conflict of any kind. Just observation. And there will be conflict only as long as there is the observer and the observed, which is what is. But what is the observer. Please don't learn phrases, but see the actual fact. Then you will find that where there is the observer, the center, the sensor, the experiencer, the entity that is always creating the division between the observed and the observer. And as long as there is an observer, there is no freedom. You know, every object, like this microphone, creates a space round itself and is in space. The object, and not only outwardly, but an object inwardly, as the me, as the experiencer, as the I, as the thinker. That center creates a space in consciousness. This space in consciousness is always limited because there is always the center. Right? One may expand this space from the center, and however much you may expand, it'll always have a border, a frontier. And therefore, that space is always psychologically limited. And therefore there is no freedom in that space. And that center, that observer, is obviously memory. Memory of what has been, whether of yesterday or 1,000 years. That center is the tradition, is the conditioned state which has been put together by time, both chronologically and psychologically. That center is the accumulation of knowledge, experience. It's always, that center is always the past. Therefore, that center is not a living thing. It is a dead memory of what has been. And when it creates a space, but it's very, very, very small round itself, as most of us do, concerned with itself endlessly. Its activities, its propositions, its ideas, it's a shabby little thing round itself. And that can expand. But however much it may expand through various tricks of thought, of compulsion, of drugs, it is always within the space which the center has created. And therefore there is no freedom, and therefore there is no peace at all. And when one observes that only when there is space, there is freedom. And that space cannot possibly exist psychologically as long as there is an observer. Right? And one must have space, as one must have beauty. Beauty which is not man-made. And is it possible then, if there is no time at all, to end what is, to end the observer, and therefore to look without the interval of time? You know, time is the space between the observer and the tree. The observer is static and the tree is static, psychologically. And so, to cover the distance between the observer and the tree takes time. And that distance, which has been created by the observer and the observed, is always static, is always stationary. So when one thinks of using time or allowing time to bring about a change in the observer, you are only being caught in the static state. So when you discover that, then you ask, is it possible to change instantly what is? the center is violence. I'm taking that as an example. It isn't really an example, it's a fact. One is violent, that's a fact. And the movement towards non-violence is static movement. It's no movement at all. Now, I explained that previously. So, our question is then, is it possible to end violence, not through time, but immediately? Because if there is observer, he's always limiting the space, and therefore there is no freedom. Therefore, as long as the observer exists, every form of attempt to transcend it, to go beyond it, is still a waste of time. So our question then is it possible to end what? The observer. Not what is. When there is no observer, there is no what is. It is the observer that creates what is. So, how is it possible to end the violence, aggression, all the rest of it, the immense hatred that one has stored up, resentment? How is it possible to end it so that one is completely, totally free of it? Probably one has never asked this question. Either one has said it, one puts up with it, gets used to it, and carries on. But if one puts that question, either you put it casually, or you put it with intention to find out. Therefore you become very serious. And when you put that question, because you are serious, because you are intent, then you are aware of the whole process of the observer, which means you are totally attentive, completely attentive. And in that attention there is no border created by the center. And when there is complete attention, there is no observer. Look, when you look at those mountains behind the speaker, they're blue, they're straight line, and the valley, and so on. When you give your complete attention to look, is there an observer? The observer comes into being only when in that look there is inattention, which is distraction. So, only total attention brings about the cessation of the observer. And when there is this ending of the observer, there is the ending of the thing which he has created as what is. Because, as we said, the observer is the observed. Right. Now, we have in this way eliminated all conflict of search. We have eliminated all conflict between what is and what should be. We have put away the observer, and therefore there is attention from it lasts a second. That's good enough. Don't be greedy to have more. In that greed to have more, you've already created the center. And then you're caught. In that attention, there is no seeking at all. And therefore there is no effort. So the mind becomes extraordinarily alert, active, silent. Then only can the mind be in a state of no experience. And this is important to understand. We all depend on experience. Experience being to go through something. We all depend on experience to keep us awake, a challenge, a question, an external impetus, influence, to keep us awake. Naturally, for the moment, that challenge, that external force keeps awake for a few minutes and one goes back to sleep. So one depends constantly on experience to keep awake. And when one realizes that, you reject all outward stimulus, all outward or inward experience. Then one can ask, can the mind be so intensely alert without experience? And if it is made alert through experience, it is not alert. Obviously. If an experience makes me love, then it's not love. Behind it there is a motive. So, such a mind is the religious mind. No longer seeking, no longer demanding experiences, is not caught in visions. And such a mind has an activity totally different, at a different dimension, which thought can never possibly reach. Thought has a place, very small place. But when one realizes that, thought has no place at all. Which doesn't mean you live on ugly little sentiments, emotions. So one can function normally, healthily, sanely in this world with a mind that is not cluttered up by thought. And it's only such a mind, the religious mind, that can know something beyond all the imaginations and structure of man's hope.
This has been the concluding program in a series of 8 presenting the talks of Krishnamurti. In his writings and talks over the past 4 decades, the insights and the challenges of Krishnamurti have attracted an ever-increasing audience in Europe, Asia, and America. This series, however, represents the first time that Krishnamurti has allowed his talks to be filmed.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.